Hey guys, Alex here. So today I'm going to be discussing which programming languages you should probably start with when you're learning to code, program, etc. So I recommend starting with Python first off. It's one of the most commonly used. It's been growing in popularity more lately, but it's always been around the top 5, top 10, depending on what you consider to be a programming language. It's probably the easiest to start learning because it takes a lot less typing, a lot less learning and understanding. When you start typing it, you can literally just put in a few words and watch the programming functions start to work before your eyes and understand how things work by making small changes to it, etc. So it's very lightweight, can work on pretty much any computer. It's a bit friendly to learn where it's going wrong. It is good at pointing out where you made mistakes when you're first starting out, and that's something that doesn't happen with some of the languages where you have to be more specific or more written out. After learning Python, I if you're going to get into anything to do with web design, you should probably start with HTML and CSS. I don't consider those programming languages, but they might technically be programming languages. So HTML and CSS are kind of joined together at the hip. They are kind of halfway between a programming language and just writing words in Word document. They're very, 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 very simple, easy to use. Once you know Python, you'll be able to figure out how HTML and CSS work within, I don't know, 5 minutes to 30 minutes. Really easy stuff. But that's kind of a gateway. Get the understand the basics before you go into learning JavaScript. JavaScript would be the actual language that you want to learn for web development, unless you're just making some simple pages, not really doing much. But if you're going to use actual programming on web pages, JavaScript is probably what you want. The I believe it's still the most compatible with web design and internet games, anything that's on a web page. JavaScript is also pretty friendly. It's about halfway between Python and the more detailed written out languages. It's it's a bit similar, so it's really easy to transition from Python to JavaScript. I don't recommend starting out with JavaScript because if you have something out of place, JavaScript will try to guess what you're trying to do, and it won't fail outright in a lot of situations where it probably should. So it will not be that it's not the best teacher at showing you when you do things wrong. Whereas Python will straight up not work in a lot of scenarios when you mess things up. So finally, the third, since I don't really count HTML and CSS, I'd say if you once you if you're going on an avenue to try to make game development or apps, then I recommend going to C Sharp or Java after working with JavaScript. Even if you won't do web design or websites, I still recommend learning JavaScript before learning Java or C Sharp. At least practice with it a little bit as a kind of halfway between Python and some of the more written out languages. So Java and C Sharp are about the same. Java's a little friendlier for Android related things, and C Sharp is a bit friendlier with computer type computer software, and also C Sharp. C Sharp's probably the way to go. I used to prefer Java. I don't know if that's still the case, but C Sharp is what's commonly used for games nowadays. If you're using game engines like Unity and Unreal, then C Sharp is just very commonly used. It's since C Sharp and Java are basically twins, or at least they used to be. There's not really it doesn't matter which one that you're doesn't make a big difference which one to go with. C Sharp might also be better for Android apps because even though Java used to be better, if you're making a game or even if you're just going to use a game engine to develop regular software, then using Unity or Unreal Engine is probably going to help you out enough to where C Sharp would be what you would use since Unity doesn't support Java anymore. So C sharp is probably the way to go. It's a little bit heavier typed. So instead of just saying x equals 3, and then you get to, from now on, if you say like x times 3, well, now, so what is x times 3? X times 3 equals 9. Okay, that makes sense. Whereas in a more heavily typed language, you have to set up a little bit, and then after setting up a little bit, you have to say x is a number, and then you have to say x will equal 3. It doesn't seem like a lot different, but when you add all those differences up to some complicated logic, you end up getting some, just a lot more need for headroom to figure it out. Another thing to consider though is if you plan on doing AI type stuff, then you can use any language, and any language will probably be fine, but Python is by far the most popular language to use for AI related things, machine learning related things, because it is so much simpler. That's part of it, is you can type out things a bit quicker. It helps alleviate some of the complexities that are needed for doing AI. It is more performant in some ways that synchronize well with AI. C sharp is more performant in other ways that is usually good for a full program or game. But really, it doesn't matter that much, as long as if you code correctly, it shouldn't make a big difference. And also, the performance is not a reason to switch between one language and another if you're using a, a language that's a solid language, one that's been out for a while, that doesn't have any wild limitations that you need to try too hard to work around. It just, how you program will probably make a bigger difference than whether you use C sharp or Python. But there are a lot more libraries and tools and assets available to utilize Python for our AI and machine learning type things. So it is easier. It's easier with getting to learn it and using the logic, but you can usually use those things with C sharp as well. Just if you're starting out and you know what you're going to, then you should probably choose the right path that's a bit more convenient, so you have the opportunity to learn it without needing to have a whole degree in whatever it is, or even if you have a degree, it usually takes a couple of extra years before you can really be proficient with the language in whatever way you want to use it. Usually it's a slow and steady pace, and that would be a lot easier if you had the right tool for the task or the right language to utilize. So after doing it for a few years, you could probably use even a language that many might call poor and do just fine. But with starting out, it will make a big difference if you're using a language that is geared toward what you're trying to do. So for Python, I recommend you learn Python, even if that's not what you want to use long term. It's a great way to get started and get used to programming languages and how they work in general before you get moved on to something more advanced like JavaScript and or C sharp. And then if you want to do AI and machine learning, stick with Python. If you want to do websites, then use JavaScript, but learn HTML and CSS first, so that you know what you're manipulating with the JavaScript. And then finally, C sharp is probably the best for making games and things like that. I would like to add one final note. There's something called C++, and C++ is even more heavily typed than C sharp. Usually it's not necessary, it's not usually needed, but it is the most performance of the ones that I've mentioned so far. Typically, it does give you more flexibility. You do get to do more with it, but with great power comes great responsibility, because you can tell your computer to do some things that your computer really should never do. And you'll straight up crash your whole system pretty easily on a regular basis if you don't know what you're doing with that. So I think it's, if you're gonna get into C++ and you want that extra little bit of performance at the end, or if you really want to be able to do anything and everything under the hood of a computer, then I just go up the ladder: Python, JavaScript, C sharp. Once you've got the hang of C sharp, then go ahead and try for C++. Just make sure you look up, you know, maybe like a top 10 do's and don'ts. I'll make a video for that, but yeah, make sure you look up a top 10 do's or don'ts for C++ before you start using it, so you don't tell your computer to do some pretty wacky things that'll just instantly eat up all its memory until it crashes or something. Well, anyway, I hope that helps. Take care, everyone.